Hello, everybody, and welcome to Biotensegrity Tea Party number 17. I am your host today. My name is Lisa Babiak. I am coming to you from St. Albert, Alberta, Canada. Joining me as co-hosts, Mariana Barreto from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. We have Rachel Tudor coming from Washington, as well as Patricia Hopper, who is our host today from also Washington, Seattle, Washington. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
Today, our speakers are Chris Clancy, coming all the way from Deep Cove in Vancouver, Canada, Susan Lowell from Washington, DC, and Graham Scarr from Nottingham in the UK. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
And let's not forget Doug. Doug Johnson is joining us as well. I think he's usually in Boston, but I think he might be joining us from Lake Michigan today.
Oh.
So I'm going to hand it
Oh, Doug's giving us a view of his forest. Okay, so where are we now?
So, Patricia, I'm going to let you carry on with our topic of teaching and learning biotensegrity.
Right. And did we want to acknowledge the sponsors before we get too much further? Or does that come later?
No, we'll go ahead and acknowledge our sponsors.
Graham, I think, was going to do that.
Thanks, Patricia. So the Biotensegrity Tea Party is an all-volunteer production of the Stephen M. Levin Biotensegrity Archive, which you can find at biotensegrityarchive.org. And it's made possible in part through the generous support of our fantastic sponsors. First, we have Handspring Publishing in East Lothian, Scotland, which are producers of highly accessible, easily applied, research-based material for movement and manual therapy professionals. The amazing team at Handspring see publishing as an art as well as a science. For them, it's a human and intellectual enterprise as well as a business. They offer a generous discount coupon to those on the archive mailing list and to our Zoom participants. And these links and the codes for the coupons will be posted in the chat. So next, we have Chris Clancy's educational organization, Embodied Biotensegrity, in Vancouver, British Columbia. For those of you looking to learn more about biotensegrity, Chris's programs are an excellent resource. We have twice, I say because I'm part of it, twice monthly meetings. One is a book club meeting and one is a movement mentors meeting. And we often are really lucky to have pioneers in biotensegrity, authors of articles and books joining us. It's a wonderful learning opportunity. We also are sponsored by Artifact Pro. Where did Artifact Pro go? Oh, there they are. I apologize. Artifact Pro of Madrid, Spain, where you can find beautiful and wonderfully constructed tensegrity models, including models of the spine and the pelvis. Artifact Pro also offers us a generous discount coupon on the archive mailing list and the Zoom participants, so we're grateful for that as well. And finally, we're very kindly supported by the British Fascist Symposium in the UK, which not only organizes their biannual BFS event, but several other exciting programs. So be sure to check them out as well. Back to you, Patricia.
Great, thank you, Rachel. And thank you, Mariana Barreto, Rachel Tudor, and Lisa Babiak for making sure that our tech and everything runs smoothly today. So thank you for that. I'm really excited to be here today to host a panel discussion on teaching and learning in biotensegrity. We have so many good things to talk about. But before we get to that, we open every Biotensegrity party with a toast. So grab your beverage and show us your cup. And the best words I could think of for toasting learning in biotensegrity were some words from Maren Deal. She says that biotensegrity is a huge adventure playground for body, mind, and soul. So let's cheer for that to Biotensegrity Tea Party number 17. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, Patricia.
And as Steve pointed out on July 12th, happy birthday, Buckminster Fuller.
Go Bucky. So
Okay.
I'm Patricia Hopper. I'm joining you from Seattle, Washington in the United States. And I am a body worker and somatic educator with a previous life in arts administration where I facilitated a lot of decision-making panels. But I would say probably my main qualification for co-hosting today is just that I really like to ask questions. So I think we have some good questions and hopefully I know some great answers today too about the topic of teaching and learning biotensegrity. Whether you're just starting to figure out what we mean when we say biotensegrity, or if you've read all the books or even written them, I think you'll get some great ideas today about how to deepen your learning and refine the way you talk about biotensegrity when you're speaking with students and clients and colleagues and maybe even your family. Thank you for joining us on YouTube and Zoom. We want to hear from you in the chat and in the comments. So please tell us who you are and where you're joining us from. As the conversation moves forward, questions and comments are essential to our discussion today and may quite possibly inform future Tea Party topics. It's been known to happen. Someone will be monitoring the questions and comments, and toward the end of today's discussion, we will call on you to ask your questions of the panel. So go ahead and type in your questions as you think of them, and we will do our best to loop back around to those later in the session. As we go into the panel at this time, we ask those of you who are on Zoom to turn off your video. This gives us a better screen view for YouTube Live. Panelists, leave your video on so we can see you. So we're joined today by three wonderful guests who will bring incredible experience and insight relating to teaching and learning in the field of biotensegrity. From my conversations with all three, I think it's safe to say that they are my favorite kind of teachers, the kind who can't stop learning themselves and who take real pleasure in helping learners of all sorts make their own discoveries. So I know that I've already learned from all three of them. Chris Morita Clancy, as Lisa said, is joining us from outside Vancouver, BC, Canada. Do you want to wave and say hi, Chris? And panelists, you can feel free
everyone.
to unmute. Yeah, great. Hi, Chris. Chris is a mother, a retired yoga teacher, and a biotensegrity enthusiast. She's committed to creating safe, collaborative learning spaces for movement professionals, body workers, and anyone with a passion for biotensegrity. She founded the online learning platform Embodied Biotensegrity in 2016. What started as a 40-hour intensive yoga and movement teachers class is now an online exploration lab, offering high-quality, accessible learning opportunities of students of biotensegrity all over the world. Chris is also on the board of Biotensegrity Archive. She co-organizes these weekly Biotensegrity parties, and she has presented at biotensegrity workshops throughout North America and Europe. Excited to have you here, Chris. Doug is also joining us. He showed us a great picture of his setting there at Lake Michigan. Do you want to say hi, Doug?
Hi. Thanks
Hi. I just want to be sure that we can hear you and that you're there. So Doug is a professor of piano at Berklee School of Music in Boston. He has performed throughout Europe and the United States. As an educator, he has done workshops and teaching residencies throughout the world. He is a licensed body mapping educator, a founding member of Berklee Performance Wellness Institute, and a board member of Biotensegrity Archive. For more about the intersection of music and biotensegrity, I encourage you to watch BiotensegriTea Party number 13, which had great presentations by Doug and his colleague Melanie Seaver, who I think is here with us today. Next up is Susan Lowell de Solórzano. I'm sure I messed that up, and is coming to us from Washington, DC. Do you want to say hi, Susan?
You did pretty good, Patricia. You know, I've been married almost 40 years and my mother still can't say it, so don't worry.
Okay. She has a master's degree in human development and education with a focus on kinesthetic learning. She is also a level 3 Tai Chi instructor. Susan is Dr. Stephen Levin's associate and a master collaborator who is instrumental in bringing forward opportunities to learn and share developments in the field of biotensegrity. She founded and organized the DC BIG, or Biotensegrity Interest Group, in 2012, and is key in bringing us these Biotensegrity Party events along with Chris Clancy, Graham Scar, and Stephen Levin. So before we get into the questions, I just wanted to kind of ground us in what we're talking about when we're talking about biotensegrity. In a conversation that I had earlier with Doug, he reminded me that it is always helpful to restate our foundational ideas to facilitate clarification and understanding. So let's just take a moment to remember what we're talking about when we say biotensegrity. Just going to share my screen here. So biotensegrity is a scientific model for the structure of biological systems. Dr. Stephen Levin introduced and established the term as a branch of science devoted to the idea that tensegrity architecture provides an essential model for biologic structure. There are only tension and compression elements in tensegrity systems. There are no shears, bending moments, or levers, just simple tension and compression in a self-organizing, load-distributing, low-energy structure. So just always good to remember why we're here and what we're talking about. So as I mentioned before, I love to learn. Sorry, I accidentally triggered my own bell there. I love to learn by asking questions. So let's get straight into the questions. So the first couple questions, I'm going to ask each panelist to talk for about 2 minutes in answer to the question. And I'm calling this the lightning round. These questions are fast, but I think that we're going to find they introduce a lot of interesting topics that we want to flesh out more as our discussion goes on. So when you're running over your 2 minutes, I will ring a bell just to let you know that it's time to wrap up. So Susan, I'm going to direct the first question to you. So can you share a specific example of when teaching or learning about biotensegrity was really good? So I want you to tell us about a learning or teaching experience when you really got it or saw a student really get it. And if there's time, tell us how that experience changed the way you teach biotensegrity.
Okay, well, I'm actually going to talk about a colleague in DC BIG, Paula James, and a lot of people here today joining us are part of DC BIG, so that's great. They already know the story. But I had a 3-strut tensegrity that I'd made, and we were passing it around, and in a circle, we sit in a circle, and different people present. And one of my Tai Chi students had come to the meeting, and she was playing with this 3-strut tensegrity, and the string broke. She broke the string. Well, she was absolutely mortified. She'd broken her teacher's model, and the whole thing went flat. And Paula James was sitting right next to her, and she said, "No, it's not a problem. This actually shows us something." And she said, "See how these sticks are hitting each other? We might think that if we want to add space, the thing to do is to try to create space at that point. But instead, if we go to the ends of the sticks and we bring those together and do the work of the broken string, and then the whole thing, of course, becomes, you know, volumetric, takes up space, fills out, and gets restored." And so it was great. So I actually kept it broken so that, because I thought this was such a great insight. And I kept it broken, and I presented several months later, maybe even a year and a half later, to a big Tai Chi conference. There were visiting Tai Chi kind of dignitaries from Taiwan, and I passed it around, and they kept doing that. They kept taking it from broken and putting it back together. And when I received it back at the end, it had been fixed. And I had to go break it again. And I'm just going to say, I know I'm over time, but the other wonderful thing for me is how much I learned in taking the time to mentor Chris, and how she teaches biotensegrity is so different from the way I teach it. And seeing that evolve has just been absolutely incredible. I think mentoring, we tend to think, or teaching, we tend to think of what the learner gets, and we forget about what the teacher is getting.
Beautiful. Thank you, Susan. That's so interesting. I know that we'll return to talking about how we can learn from models later in the session. So Deg, I'm going to have you take that question next. So just to remind you, we're telling about a learning or teaching experience where you really got it, or saw a student or a colleague really get it, and how that experience has changed the way you teach biotensegrity.
Well, the example I'd like to mention is the first time I started presenting this to my students at Berkeley. And my concern at the time was, oh, this is going to sound very intellectual and complicated, and they're going to be thinking, well, I'm a musician, why are you teaching me all this science? And they might not see the relevance, although I was incredibly excited to try to communicate what the relevance was. And my experience ended up being that when I presented to them the ideas that they're already seeing the world through some lenses that they aren't aware that they are, namely the block learning model that we can be presented with in terms of looking at our body, and that's intuitive. We can take that on, and we can try to make that true. And the whole machine learning or man as machine idea, which we are given culturally, and we can take that on. And it can be intuitive with our body. But the wonderful thing is when I presented the idea of tensegrity and had the model, this is my favorite model, and just showing them how lifelike the movement of this model is, and how it's springy, but it's much richer than the way a simple spring moves, that the result was this was intuitive. As easily as those models that are problematic are intuitive, this is intuitive. And I like to bring in the idea of cat learning. You know, we observe animals like cats, and that seems perfectly natural. And then we actually have a choice how we can view ourselves. Are we going to be a stack of blocks? Are we going to be a machine? Or are we going to be more like a cat and more like this? And the beauty of it was they quite universally in the class, since they didn't have the baggage of going to medical school, they could take on those ideas. And then throughout the semester, as I was introducing other things, and in particular showing examples of great artists, great musicians moving beautifully, people will invariably connect it back to this larger framework. So it was both that initial experience of teaching, but I just continually find when you connect to people in terms of the intuitive movements, as opposed to some of the minutiae, which can be off-putting, remarkably, people so consistently connect to it immediately. And that's what I like.
Nice. I love hearing about this cat learning. I'm very interested in that, and I see that with my clients as well. When I talk to them, not using the technical terms of biotensegrity, but when I explain something about how their body works, they usually basically just say, of course. So Chris, you're next for that question. I'll repeat the question just to give you a moment to gather your thoughts. So you're telling us about a teaching or learning experience where you really got it or really saw a student get it, and reflecting on how that experience changed your teaching of biotensegrity.
Yes, thanks, Patricia. And also thank you, Susan, because Susan spent countless hours with me before I taught the first embodied biotensegrity, which was a 40-hour training that brought biotensegrity to yoga teachers. And I had been very grateful that I had been to the Biotensegrity Summit in Washington, D.C. in 2015. I got to meet Susan and Joanne and John and Steve and all these protagonists, and came home. I'm a meditator. I sat, and there was this directive, told me it said actually embodied biotensegrity, 40-hour training. And that's a certain voice that I always act on. So I sent Susan an email basically looking for guidance and permission to use this. And eventually she got back to me, and really we spent a couple of hours a week on a weekly basis, Susan teaching me. So when I started teaching these trainings, I was bringing the concepts of biotensegrity to yoga teachers. And they were excited. They went on to share, and there were a lot of also misunderstandings. And then I hosted Joanne Avison on the Embodied Biotensegrity online platform, and she introduced a mandala as a way of planning a class in a circle, which I adapted to teaching biotensegrity. And we're going to talk about that more, I hope. But when I brought it to the teacher training that I was guest teaching at the next weekend, there was suddenly an understanding, suddenly a framework within which to put all of this fairly new information, and that made everything hugely different for me. So beginners and even people familiar with the concept were suddenly able to manage not just this new knowledge, but what they didn't know. I see you looking down at your timer, so I'm gonna, I didn't actually start my timer when I started talking.
You all did great. I didn't even go to 3 minutes. So you all are doing fabulously. And yeah, this idea of the mandala is really interesting. And what I especially am interested in is that you say this is all new, and it is a new way of thinking, and that adds some challenges to the teaching and learning that don't exist in long established fields. So I'm sure that we'll dive into more of that, and I look forward to hearing more about the mandala.
Thanks.
So the second and last lightning round question is, and I'm going to ask all three panelists also to answer this. When I think of the properties of the biotensegrity model, global responsiveness, omnidirectional expansion and contraction, maximal efficiency, to name a few, some are easier to grasp than others. You have a choice here. You can either talk about your favorite emergent property to teach and why, or you can talk about what aspect of biotensegrity is particularly challenging to teach and why. Let's just go the same order to keep things easy. So Susan, do you want to start us off?
Yes. Okay, so, and I'm going to be bad. I'm going to twist your question just a little bit.
Perfect.
My favorite way to teach the concept of emergent properties, I think, right now at least, is the simple triangle. Because a lot of people, there's so much that can be understood with a triangle, and we're not even getting to tensegrity, biotensegrity. We're just talking about structure, but there's so much you can learn from simple triangles about emergent properties, because there are so many. I just love that. And when people don't understand the minimal energy structure that is the triangle, the force distribution structure that is the triangle, it's going to be all the more difficult to find these when they take it to the more complex tensegrity structure. And the other thing I'll say, it's hard to know what the most misunderstood or difficult to understand properties or concepts are, because every time I think I've focused in on it, another one pops up. But one or two are the fact that this is a nested self-similar hierarchical force distribution system all the way down the line, which is related to why shear never emerges in the system. And I think a lot of people miss that, and they think that somehow we become, a bone breaks, and they assume that it's shear as in a physical structure that is inert. And that's just not there's something, they're getting stuck at a hierarchical level and they can't see how the forces are being passed down. And then the other one would be internal versus external forces, but we're out of time.
Great, thank you, Susan. Before we go to Doug, I'm just hoping before we get too far that you can just give us a really quickie definition of emergent property. Not specifically for biotensegrity, but just to ground us in what we mean when we say emergent properties.
Me or Doug?
Susan,
You.
why don't you take it?
Yeah, Susan can take
Okay.
it.
So I would say it's something that you didn't see coming, and then all of a sudden it's there. And you couldn't have seen it coming, and then all of a sudden it's there. And then, depending on what it is, it can also go away just as quickly. I say it this way. I instantly loved my grandchildren. I didn't say, well, give me a few weeks. Let me get to know them. I don't really know them yet. It was totally emergent property. The minute you hear they're coming, you love them completely. And so it's like that.
Nice, thank you. So Doug, you're next up with the question about properties and the biotensegrity model. Just a reminder, you're talking about your favorite emergent property to teach and why, or what aspect of biotensegrity is challenging to teach and why.
So I just add one thing that about emergent properties first, that
Great.
A property of the component can't predict the property of a group of these components. And they can be completely surprising, and yes, just that unpredictable quality is so amazing. So I think it's the most amazing one is still the easiest one to communicate, and which is the universal responsiveness, the idea of one part moving and all other parts move. Because as far as relevance for what I do as a musician myself, working with musicians, but also working with musicians that are having pain, musicians that know that they're functioning suboptimally and trying to learn how to optimize function. This is the key element that relates to all others. And back to the idea of block learning, when we have that model, when we're viewing ourselves through that lens, we will in some ways restrict that responsiveness. And in doing that, we make ourselves modular. A challenge in communicating the ideas of tensegrity is a lot of us are working to optimize function. A lot of us here are therapists of one kind or another, and people are having pain, they're having some sort of restrictions, and we want to help them function better. But a challenge is when people say, I do tensegrity movements, because as people, I'm sure people want to jump in and say immediately, we're always tensegrity. So any movement we make is a tensegrity movement. Yet, as tensegrity structures and biotensegrities, we need to understand those things in terms of tensegrities. Graham and I've had this discussion many times saying, well, a tensegrity, all of us optimizes. But if we're doing something that fragments us into different sections, once again, the model shows it. If I really just lock this section and block it out, I can have a section of this that's still working optimally within the limitation that I'm setting here, and I can have another module here, but they're not talking to one another. So that this property of universal responsiveness, which we can say is simply a property of this relatively inert thing. But when it comes to living beings, we have so many things that we can vary that in terms of muscle tone and variable muscle tone and intention, and the way we organize ourselves in terms of our understanding or belief that can be incorrect. It can be for all sorts of various reasons. We can end up creating blocks in places, and having this model as the optimum and then working as a goal towards optimizing is the central thing for me in all this work I do.
Great, thank you, Doug. And you've used the word block learning a couple times, and if I understand you correctly with that, that's the idea that the body structure is like a stack of blocks. Is that what that is?
I guess two different words depending on the context. So yes,
yeah.
the block is in bricks. So that map. So a few weeks ago when we were talking about body mapping, the emphasis was this interface in how the beliefs that we have, and when I say beliefs, I don't necessarily just mean intellectual, but the visceral belief that we have about our body affects how we organize ourselves. So if we have this sense that we're supposed to be organized as a stack of blocks one upon another, it also creates blocks or locks, places that aren't responsive in the system. So many people have a locked thoracic spine, and so there's a way that the arm isn't going to talk to the feet.
Okay, super. Thank you for explaining that term. I know that we'll return to all of these ideas later in the session as well. So Chris, next to you. So just talking about either the emergent property that you find easy to teach and why, or which one is challenging to teach and why?
So actually, when I approach sharing biotensegrity, I like people to have their hands on a tensegrity structure and to identify as many emergent properties as they can. And I feel like the easiest emergent property to teach or the best one is different for each individual. So my classes, when in-person classes, are very interactive. Everybody's got different color felt pens. They're writing these emergent properties down. And then I ask them what sparkles, which of these qualities really interest you? Because that's the doorway in. Biotensegrity is such a complex topic, and everybody needs to find their own interests. And that way, everybody will also bring their own unique learning, their own unique experience to the learning environment. And what happens is a collaboration. You never know what is going to be the result. You never know who's going to offer what. It depends on who shows up. And so to me, it's the one that sparkles for you. Personally, I love introducing heterarchy, because this word, which as opposed to hierarchy that's top down, heterarchy where every part, or in the case of a classroom, every person, or in the case of the body, the different scales contributes to or influences every other in all directions. That's something that for me informs all I do. Or perhaps it's the other way around. I was already living this way and I find this word and I get really excited about it. So yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, as I was preparing for this panel, I went back to some notes that I took in a class from you. It was the very first session of the Shifting Paradigms class, where you ask us to basically respond to the model and say that, the classic tensegrity model, this guy, and you asked us to write down its properties. And I looked at that list and I was like, wow, we were so smart. It was our first class. We hadn't learned anything. And look, we identified all these properties that we later learned are part of the scientific model. So thank you for that kind of collaborative learning experience. And I look forward to hearing more about that too.
Thanks.
So, phew, we're out of the lightning round. I'm not going to be timing you for these next questions. So we can kind of have a little bit more organic discussion here. And for those of you who are listening in, keep the questions coming. We look forward to getting to your questions too. So Chris, I'm gonna shoot this to you. I'm really curious to hear you talk more about using the mandala to create a way in for students to understand biotensegrity. And I can say that as a student in your courses, that your mandala exercise really helped me understand Biotensegrity better. Can you tell us more about how you developed and used this unique learning tool?
Yeah, okay. I'm just looking for my presentation that I had up. Here it is. And I'm going to share the screen because I think the visuals are very helpful. But how come it doesn't show up here? Okay, I'm just going to have to share my desktop, which is kind of messy. That's unfortunate. I was thinking I could just share Keynote.
Maybe we can just say it's hierarchical.
Okay, thank you.
Indeterminate.
It is just sharing Keynote now, Chris.
Oh, it is. Ah. Okay, you would think I'd be the tech person and that this is, here we go. Start at the beginning. There we go. Now what do you see?
We see the tensegrity / biomechanics mandala.
Okay, thank you. So this is one of the many variations of the mandala, and it changes every time it's created. What I tend to do, because I work mostly with yoga and movement people, is I want to create a framework within which to put the new concepts of biotensegrity, or new to the participants, because most of us haven't learned about soft matter and hierarchy and tensegrity in grade school or even in our trainings. So often what I'll do is start by eliciting. Here you can see some of the cues or metaphors that people use. And then we go from there to identify the concepts on a very superficial level that have led to these cues, these concepts. And often we'll do an embodied exploration using the cues that they elicited. And then we go from there. Sometimes we hop back and forth and start identifying. So for example, here, instead of body as machine, looking at hard matter, go opposite to we're living, breathing, moving beings. And the fact that biotensegrity is concerned with soft matter. All biology, we are soft matter. So I'm gonna this is on fast forward. So this is what it might look like. This can take an hour, it can take 20 minutes, it can take 2 hours. Sometimes it'll take us a whole weekend to complete this. And we're working together. As much as possible, I'm eliciting things from the participants. And then even past this, I would put some cues up here when we start to create language that comes from the emergent properties, usually what people are already familiar with. So I'm going to show you a couple more. This was the very first one I made. One of the beauties of this, when I was teaching before the mandala, I found it really hard to organize my where I was going. There's so many concepts, and I'm a nonlinear thinker. So using this mandala, then I had a reference point to go back to. And then you can see this is one of the ones I created myself. And I think it's really encouraging for everybody present, because I give them templates and ask them to draw and write along, is I am not an artist. So it doesn't take a lot to get the gist of something. And I think that's encouraging for people. Because having the doodles there, having those little sketches are really easy ways to remember things. Here's another one, and you can see this group was a whole weekend. So they went further, and this is another one. What I've added here, I just gotta, over here on the right, you can see the sign. It's a caution sign. So I've started, when I present this, to give a caution and remind people that this is a really superficial, wide view. And it takes, then you can see the invite, it takes ongoing learning. And as you know, Patricia and Susan and Graham, we often are together in, say, book club meeting. And we're always discussing, always learning, really willing in that safe space to take risks, to ask those so-called stupid questions, or to rephrase things so we can start to talk about them ourselves, which is really hard to do with these new concepts. What else do I have here? Oh, so I recently presented a 3-month course online, Shifting Paradigms, and I know many of you were there. We started with the mandala that I had created, and then we finished with an invitation for people to create their own mandalas. And these are just a couple of examples. This one here on the left was created by Elizabeth Andes Bell. And the process of taking out some of that information, putting it on a mandala in a way that made sense to her, in a way that helped her organize her thoughts as they relate to the work that she's already doing. So this is the one that she came up with. And next to that on the right, Rebecca calls this a word mandala. And the process of creating this is really good for sticky learning. It helps you integrate what you've learned. I don't know if Eileen Dickinson is here today, but she was doing one in 3 dimensions, which we haven't seen yet. This is Lisa Babiak's, again, a different approach. I have only, the writing's really small. She sent me a photo. I've only taken a really quick look. And she is, again, organizing these concepts in a way that makes sense to her, in a way that is not just informed by the work that she's doing with her Lisa, I forget the name of your program. It's just like integral movement. But also, once she creates this, then it informs where she's going to go with her teaching. And this one was created by Nikki Inglis, who sometimes comes and assists me. She was on the original teacher training, or the original Embody Biotensegrity 40-hour training. She had been doing her master's in education and decided that she was going to study me and the way I was teaching as part of her master's degree. And so creating this training, she was hand in hand teaching me about pedagogy, identifying some of what I already was doing, but also teaching me things like doodling and sticky learning. So I think that's
great. So much good stuff here. I can say that doing this exercise made me realize that I had to be a little bit more conscientious about how much my thought process was inhabited by the biomechanical model, even though I don't know that I believe in it. I don't know that I've ever believed in it, but I still, culturally speaking, that language has been in the past the language that I speak about the human structure with. So that kind of dovetails really nicely to the question that I'm going to ask Doug next, which is that as a student of biotensegrity, I am constantly juggling 2 different fields of learning. The science, learning the features of a biotensegrity structure so I can understand the biology, and also the frame of reference, managing the mental flip-flops that result as I try to set aside and overcome the language of man as machine. I'm curious to hear you talk about this second part, the frame of reference. How do you help students shift their frame of reference toward biotensegrity?
I think what I was saying before is really kind of the answer to this as well, is that giving them a sense of that they are looking through some lenses already. They aren't just starting. None of us are really starting with an open mind in a sense that we already are coming from someplace, but we can be open-minded in how we go forward from there. So clarifying what their beliefs are viscerally, and then allowing them to shift. And then maybe I'll just make a move to another area a little bit, is, you know, how then to apply that, what are some ways that we can understand that? And a question that invariably comes up is related to discussions about relaxation. So one of the things we'll do is observe beautiful movements of a dancer or an athlete or a musician, and I ask people to describe what they see, and they invariably use these words that are not very helpful. Like, one is, well, it looks natural. And if your goal is to try to find that movement yourself, just telling yourself to move natural or naturally doesn't, there's not a lot of nuance there. And another word is, well, it feels relaxed or it looks relaxed. And that the word relax is probably the most commonly used in teaching settings. And there's such a value for relaxation. But one of the things Patrick McDonald, who was one of FM Alexander's students, said was most, I'm paraphrasing, but most places of excessive tension are caused by excessive relaxation somewhere else, or inappropriate relaxation is what causes locks in the body. And so, yeah, that issue of being collapsed is not ultimately the feeling that people are looking for. People know they don't want tension. So how can we understand this globally? And the idea, and I believe Feldenkrais talks about 3 states. One would be collapsed, one would be locked, and I believe the other one he talks about is tonus. But there's a sense your hand is not dropped at all, but if you flip your fingers, they're springy, but you might describe this as relaxed, but it's such a different thing than collapse. So I love the idea of equal tonus, and we can't say exactly immeasurably all the muscles have the same tone, but there's a sense of unification of muscle tone in the body. And it's interesting how that goes hand in hand with singleness of focus and purpose. And children tend to all move this way, and they're always singleness of purpose. No, they're not checking their text while they're doing a task. If they're crying, they're crying. If they're happy, they're happy. And I'm going to share my screen here as well and just show a couple things as examples. So this picture makes me happy every time I see it. And there's such, once again, I could say it's singleness of purpose, but she's unified in her emotion and the way it's being expressed in her body. And one thing in particular that I like to focus on is the way her hands are expressing that. Her hands are open and alert and not dropped, and it's right to the fingertip. And there's a connection. We talk about core out a lot, but there's also a way that the way the hand is alert and focused, it also affects the core in reverse. And this is another example I like of different levels of tonus. And I really would encourage everybody to try this on themselves as we go through these pictures. The amount of muscle tone required to play Olympic table tennis, ping pong, is a certain level. So you look at the quality of muscle tone in his hand here holding the ball, and also the hand in holding the paddle. And it's the same, and it's going to be through his whole body. There's that certain level of tone. And then you take it to a racket that's a bit heavier, the badminton racket there. And it's still a very light racket, but if you held it with the same amount of tone, you'd likely drop the racket. And then you take it down to Nadal there, the amount of muscle tone involved in just holding a tennis racket and being able to return the ball. It's not a local change. It's not that just your hand is tighter. There's a global increase in tone. And lots of fun examples. And this is an example on the other end where in Tai Chi, well, Susan could speak to this more obviously, but the ideal is the muscles are incredibly soft, and it's not just a local thing, it's a global thing. So there's an equality of tone. And then at some point we tend to lose that. We have people, something's playing here, that, tend to collapse or lock. And do I have a few more minutes, or?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
And it's fascinating, in particular with the hands, how critical that is in Aikido. The way the hands organize is really central to the way it's taught, and a way that the power is generated through the body. one of the things that comes up with students is that when they first start getting this idea that, well, it's not collapse, it's, there must be this place where it's somewhere between collapsed and tense. And we're never going to find it that way. But there's this, when we find this global suspension in the whole system, then things work so differently. And dancers know this. You never see tap dancers with dropped hands. It's part of the style, but the reason it's part of the style, I think, is because it's functional. Just such a beautiful example of the hands opened out or coming around, and that's integral in the support through the spine and the whole body. And just, I'd like to show one quick example of Horowitz's left hand. The fingers are open and his arm floats across the keys. And this one last one I'd like to show. This is a student I worked with in Brazil that was having, she was a violinist, and she was having pain between her shoulder blades and fixing her spine. And what the primary thing we were focusing on is that suspension from the fingertips through the whole hand, and then exploring the movement of the hands that was mobilizing her whole body, but it was generated through the intention of the movement of her fingers in her hand. And this was within a half an hour, and she was really having chronic pain, and she was having so much fun exploring the movements and mobilizing throughout her entire system. And one of the things I love that this shows is when Steve talks about the idea that we don't move our arm, we reconfigure our body. What she's doing is constantly mobilizing and reconfiguring. So at every point, she's exactly where she needs to be. And now she's here and she's exactly where she needs to be. She's not just moving apart. And it's remarkable how that equal tonus through the system was triggered by the activation of the hands in a way that created that suspension.
Thank you, Doug. That was so interesting. I loved watching the look on her face as she was doing that.
So happy.
And I also love thinking about movement of the whole body as it relates to the hands, which is so important to musicians. And I hadn't, a lot of times we focus on the feet, as you mentioned, and not how movement translates through the whole system, including the hands. And I love that idea. I was fascinated by that picture of the three different athletes where you were talking about the different tonus. And I think that that's a wonderful segue into the question that I wanted to ask Susan about, which was about models and making and playing with models to learn about biotensegrity. And Susan, you can answer, you can talk about models in any way you want, but I thought it might be interesting to hear you talk about how you might use a biotensegrity model to play with the ideas of those three different, all these variations in tonus that can occur to create movement. If that's too complex, just talk about using models to learn.
Yeah. It's a big question. And Doug, what a great job you did talking about Tai Chi, I've got to tell you. Have you taken Tai Chi or Aikido or one of those internal?
Years ago, and I really couldn't do it well, but it really, it influenced my thinking a lot, and I'm actually picking it back up again. I'll follow up with you later.
Okay, so this is going to be a little, let's see if I can do this. There's an exercise that I've done with a lot of my Tai Chi, well, all my Tai Chi classes, I do it now. Because once I understood, and I got into Biotensegrity because it started helping me make sense of what the ancient Tai Chi writings are, the Tai Chi classics, because there were things I didn't understand. Once I held a tensegrity, it was like, oh, this is what they're talking about. So if you stand up, you can't do this alone very easily, but if you stand up and someone puts their hand on your upper arm and stands next to you and starts to gently add pressure. What are your choices? Right? They start to push you.
Amen.
We tend to think that our choices are fight or flight. Okay, Tai Chi says there's always a third option. That third option has to do with this wholeness of our tensegral structure and getting it optimized from my perspective. If somebody puts their hand and they start slowly to give you that pressure, and you think of yourself as expanding omnidirectionally, auxetically, connecting from below the feet up through the top of the head and out through all the fingertips, everything, all that force coming in, getting distributed through the system, you'll actually, as you improve your ability to do this, to manage that force coming in, and the person pushing should never push past your ability to manage it. So there's sensitivity training on both sides of the exercise. You'll start to feel one foot typically become more pressured to the ground than the other. And what's happening is that pressure coming in is getting fractalized, to use Michael Turvey's term, through the system, and then is recollecting at the bottom of the foot to transfer to the ground. So just as a basketball doesn't really care if somebody's pushing on it, and you push really hard on that basketball, what you're pushing on is the ground. Now, a basketball is a different kind of structure, but we end up using all kinds of models to help us understand biotensegrity, not just tensegrity models. So that's one, that's A. Do I have time for B? It's a related exercise. Where am I? Yes, go. Okay.
Quickly.
Yes, quickly. So that's that, taking that force and taking it down. Now, let's say I instead say I'm going to harness ground reaction force. And my body weight is generating that up through my system, right? And I take that ground reaction force, bring it through my system, and focus it to meet where that hand is bringing pressure. For me, this is a much more, it requires more practice and awareness. And I bring my ground reaction force to focus right at that point where the pressure is coming in. The person pushing feels it differently. I experience it differently. And the test for either one of these, if you're doing them right, is when that person who's pushing, and they may push very, very hard, and you feel completely comfortable, that's one marker that you've got it. And if they take their hand away very quickly, you don't wobble. Your structure was not dependent, was not leaning on them. So.
Great, thank you. I think all of you have mentioned this idea of learning about biotensegrity by sensing it in your own body, which I think that these kinds of exercises are really important. But do you encounter students who have a hard time feeling it in their own body? And if you do, what kind of teaching tools do you use? Are there metaphors or other ways of helping them feel it? I'll let whoever takes that question, whoever wants to take that question can start it off, or all of you can speak, however you want to do it.
One of the things I like to focus on is mobilizing versus releasing. That if there's some place that's frozen, that isn't able to, once again, this model, if I do this in front of a class, some people intuitively start moving their spine like this, and other people, they have no idea what's going on with the spine. This could relate to the spine. So to try to go to a place that's tight and tell them to relax it, I find to be pretty much useless. But to actively, and once again to the model, if there's a block here, if we can find the place that's moving and then find the border of what's moving and it's not, and then start to figure out how to mobilize that and move through, then that gets, it's more effective and direct results and different strategies for that.
Does anybody else want to speak to that? How you help students who can't feel it in their body?
Sure, I will.
Chris, you go first, and then I'll follow if
Perfect.
you haven't already taken, if you haven't already covered what I was going to cover, which you may very well do.
Okay, so first of all, what I would say, and this is an example that Lisa Babiak shared with us, is to speak the language of the person you're talking to. Lisa was talking to a physics teacher about a shoulder issue and trying to explain that, well, maybe it really wasn't the shoulder, but maybe it was coming from here. And she used her movement person's language. And then we had been talking about degeneracy in the Biotensegrity Trailblazers group. And when she shares this with me, she said all she had to do was say, I don't remember her language, but something about degeneracy. And he got it like that. And then with that change of the language in his head, it brought an understanding, and immediately he changed. Another thing, there was something else I wanted to say. Oh yeah, so often I'm most familiar with movement environments, but sometimes people are not able to sense so deeply in their body. But the quality of auxeticity, so the omnidirectional expansion and coming back to center, and I've got one here, where is it? Have them hold, have them hold and move. The Hoverman sphere will help people tap into first the breath, but as they just holding and moving one of these helps them tap into the auxetic nature of their breath. And then we can invite them to bring awareness further and further out into the limbs, into the skin. And even some people feel also, certainly I do, the whole, I don't even know what you call it, that energy field around you. So it's a very simple doorway in. Anyways, I'm going to pass this over to Susan now.
Great.
Yeah.
And before you speak, Susan, sorry to interrupt. I know that we're at the hour, and after you answer this question, Susan, we'll do a little station identification, and then we'll
Actually,
just see where the conversation leads.
but you know what, Patricia, what we've been doing lately is just putting that station identification at the end.
Oh, okay.
Which I think has been working.
Okay.
So I think probably Rachel and Lisa and Mariana are behind the scenes, but thank you for respecting that. That's wonderful.
Okay, no problem. So I hope I didn't interrupt your thought.
No. And what I love is how you see we are all coming at this differently, which is to me where the real strength is. We study networks in biotensegrity, and the fact that this is an expanding network gives strength to educating people about the subject. But I was going to speak to metaphor. Metaphor is so positive, so powerful. Suzette Hayden-Elgin wrote about how you can, work with a company for a week on trying to help them work more efficiently. But if you just say, instead of running this company, we're going to start sailing it, everybody's mind will make a shift, and you can get further faster with metaphor. And I'm really blessed that I've had this Tai Chi experience, because the Tai Chi classics and a lot of that looks to nature and the structures that are within nature and uses metaphor all the time. So if I'm working, I usually give my students more than enough metaphors. Choose the one that works for you. Do you want to think of yourself as a fountain? And this is not a biotensegrity thing. This is a Tai Chi thing, but it, I think, answers the question in some ways. Do you want to think of water coming up through you and squirting up through the top of your head and out your fingertips? Or do you want to think of yourself as a plant or a blade of grass or a flower that's coming up and opening? Different metaphors are going to give you different feelings, and some people can't relate to one at all, but they'll relate to another one. And so metaphor is just really powerful.
Great, thank
It,
you.
and is in itself a model. It's use of a model. Yes.
Yeah, great, thank you. So usually what we do at this point, about an hour in, is we invite you to turn your video back on so that we can all see each other. And if folks have questions that they want to ask, if you've run into sticky spots as you try to talk about biotensegrity with people who you hope will learn about it, these three folks are super ones to ask those questions. I see that we have a question coming in. Early on, there was a question about somebody was asking about Doug's favorite models. That was at the very beginning. Let me see if I can.
Elizabeth Larkham was asking Doug, which is your favorite model? And so if you could just show it. And also, let me say, Patricia, I think somebody may be keeping track behind the scenes for us of who's in what order in terms of questioners.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of questions actually, so I'm just kind of, I'm looking at the couple that have come in, but I'm happy, I have like pages and pages of questions that I can keep asking if people are still interested, but I also want folks to feel free to raise their hand and jump into the conversation at this point, because that's how we can really learn from each other. So Doug, take it away with your model.
Yeah, I'm very lucky to have this model. This is a Tom Fleming's model, and I think this is the last one that he sold off the website, and I know he continued to build and work, but we talked a while, and I bought this, and actually we talked after a friend got this to me for my 50th birthday, which was, other than my red bike when I was 8, the best present I ever got, because it really, holding this more than anything really clarified a lot of things for me. So.
Great,
I think a lot of people have model envy, Doug.
Yeah, I definitely, when you held that up in Biotensegrity number 13, I was like, oh wow, that explained it so well, and it made me want to have you on this panel about how we learn, because I felt like I learned so much just hearing you talk about how one block in that system could block the resonance throughout the whole system. So that was so instructive. Somebody asked here how you find reliable teachers or reliable sources of information for biotensegrity. Obviously it's tensegrity and now biotensegrity have become kind of a buzzword. Rachel, do you want to ask that question yourself? Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask, please.
Sure, I was just saying that's me. I'm asking that. I think those of us that are here are already doing a good job of that. But my question comes from my own experience, which is that even though I think everybody has great intentions, as teachers, of course they do, and are very well-versed maybe in their particular subject or subjects, I found in my personal experience that they might not actually be giving as reliable information as they may think about biotensegrity. Again, like for my own experience, a little bit over a year ago now, I was thinking about doing my own workshop on biotensegrity, and there was a voice inside of me that said, put on the brakes, really make sure you know what you're talking about. And I'm glad I did that, because since then I found Chris, and I found, the people that founded it, Dr. Steve Graham, the pioneers of it. So now I'm not sure I would even do that at this point, having learned so much more, but also understanding what I still don't know. Even the very, what could seem simple, how do you use the term? Is it capitalized? Is it not? Is it a noun? Is it a verb? How do you say biotensegral? Do you say through the lens? Anyway, I'm going on and on. But that's,
thank you, Rachel. So I think there were at least 2 questions in there. One is, how do you identify reliable sources of information about biotensegrity? And then the second one is, is biotensegrity capitalized? How do you use this word? So Susan wants to answer something. Go for it.
Well, Patricia, I think you have a slide.
I do have a slide.
Yeah, I think Patricia's going to be right there. And, or what I consider a really good place to start. And I think all of those questions get answered between these 5 websites.
And there's so much free content on all these websites that it can keep you busy a very, very long time.
Yeah, and if somebody's looking to start it's really good to learn in community, as I think our stories have illustrated. It's really important because we have blind spots and there are unexpected delights that come from other people. You may think you're doing a very good job learning on your own, but find a group online, in person, however you can do it. It's really important to learn in community, and ask any of us. We're happy to talk about this.
Yeah, thank you, Susan.
Emerging properties, when people come together, there's surprising things happen compared to just being by yourself.
Right. Yeah, and Carol had a question about that, I think, or a comment. Mentorship has come up a couple times in this session today. And Carol Davis, do you want to share your comment about learning from other teachers?
Well, for a large part of my life, I was a teacher of teachers in the clinic as a physical therapist, and then as academic teachers. I actually taught in a PhD program how to teach in the classroom and in the clinic. And so I was constantly reading about and practicing and learning teaching methods that were more designed to help people with hands-on learning. And from the very beginning, I was struck by Patricia's modeling of good teaching. And I just thought, oh, I've got to start writing this down. Well, all of the teachers had wonderful examples. They were modeling excellent teaching. You would want to be their student. You would want your children to learn from them. And I just, the whole interactive aspect of it, and I'll just summarize real quickly with Patricia, starting with the lightning round, getting everyone to introduce the concepts, the stark contrast to the sage on the stage. This is what these are the objectives. This is what we're gonna learn today. She invited the participants, put a boundary around it so that they didn't go on too long, and then opened the discussion with 2 beautiful lightning rounds. Look at her face. Her face was constantly open and smiling. She repeats the question to each person to kind of let them ground a little bit and remember where they are. She said at the end, she gave feedback. Thanks for that answer. I loved it. I love the way the child was smiling on that one slide. And then at one point, oh, I hope I didn't interrupt your thought. The constant concern for the teacher for the contribution of the student. Good learning happens in the middle. It happens when the teacher brings ideas and then opens up the discussion to the students, and then something is created in the middle. And this is biotensegrity. This is the emergence of the learning. And Doug referred to that a couple of times. With Chris, you discover how to organize these ideas. You, the emergent properties, you make your own mandala and then find the sticky, and I love that concept, sticky learning. And then showing different models of how everybody got it in a different way and personalized it. With Doug, we don't just, quoting Steve again, we don't just move apart an arm, we reorganize the whole body. We equalize the tone, and showing that model. And I'm not a musician, I'm a singer, but I'm not a musician, but my Aunt Emily was a professional piano teacher. And I keep thinking about how much she would love how Doug teaches. That whole concept of using your whole body as part of the instrument and how biotensegrity builds into that. And then Susan, using models to teach, having you feel it in your own body. And metaphors are models. I never thought about that. They are. Metaphors.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay.
I really appreciate you summarizing in such an interesting way what has been happening today, and sort of distillizing kind of the teaching tools that we all try to use when we're talking to people about biotensegrity. And I'm honored by your comments. It looks like Chris has something she wants to add.
I just want to follow up on what Carol was saying about models, what Susan was saying about models, and really emphasize the importance of building your own models. Now, it might be a tensegrity model, it might be playing with bubbles, it might be building the tetra helixes. What we discovered when we did this online course, which is of course in the middle of COVID restrictions, was everybody came at it their own way, and brought their own flavor. So people were using strips of cloth because they didn't have string. They were using twigs because they didn't have chopsticks or and pencil crayons. Rachel used pencil crayons. But what happened over this 3 months as we were building different models is it inspires in us the desire to be creative and to learn through hands-on. What does this do? Through our, you could call them failures, but they're actually learning opportunities. And Rebecca built a foot model as part of her final exploration. And then June Kwok, who was in Christine Wuschke's training that I presented at, she has taken the tensegrity sculptures to her garden. Her garden's filled with them, but she also took Graham's single string instructions and used them as a way of creating poems. So instead of at the back of Graham's book, you'll see instructions for how to do that. Can I show a picture of this? Well, I'm going to pass this on to someone else, but
Second edition.
Pardon?
It's in the second edition.
It's in the second edition, yeah. So she, on every strut, she wrote a phrase. So as she's building the tensegrity, she's following the string, and each strut that she goes to is part of a poem. And I'm going to be quiet now and let someone else speak. But it's so exciting to see where people go. Mariana with her tuning pegs, with pipe cleaners, and I could go on, but I'm going to mute myself and let someone else.
Susan has something to say, but I also, I know that there are some other people who have questions. So Susan, why don't you comment, and then I'll go to the next questioner.
Well, I just wanted to connect back with the models and emergent properties ideas that keep coming up, and just very quickly say the other thing is that we need to go back to the models. I go back to the model all the time, all the models all the time, to answer my own questions. And it helps me identify when I've got a bump in the road where I don't understand something. So I'm very quickly going to say, I was building tetrahedrons, and I was building a tetrahedron of tetrahedrons, like a Sierpinski's. And I assumed, this was quite a while ago, that inside the tetrahedron made of tetrahedrons would be a tetrahedron. And I'm looking inside and I thought, wait a minute, that's an octahedron. If you build a tetrahedron of tetrahedrons inside, like in orange here, it's not a tetrahedron, it's an octahedron. This is an emergent shape that's within this. So we learn about shapes within shapes that naturally emerge just because that's the physics of it. I thought, wait a minute, how come nobody's ever mentioned that? Run inside. There it is in Graham's book. There it is in Danielle Claude Martin's book, very clearly. I had read it. I'd read both of them, but I didn't understand it. I didn't understand what I had read until I built it.
Nice. Yeah, Susan. And I had this discovery with models, which was that, of course, we hear over and over that failure is learning, right? And my brain says, okay, failure is learning. But emotionally, of course, I still experience failure as something other than learning. But when I was in the shifting paradigms class, and we have to, I say have to, we are asked to explore through models, which is something as a non-scientist I wasn't sure if I could do. I had lots of failures that produced learning, and I understood that teaching and learning idea just like you understood this idea that you had read for the first time viscerally. So yes, thank you. So we have a couple questions. I'm going to go to Lisa first, and then Mark Flanagan, and then Melanie Seaver. So Lisa, why don't you unmute yourself and start us off? I think you had a question. And if you want to direct it to a particular panelist, feel free to do so.
Yeah, no, you know what? My question was addressed.
Great. Okay, thanks, Lisa. So Mark, did you still have a question or a comment? You'll need to unmute yourself.
Mark, hold on, we can't.
Okay, okay, Mark. Oh.
I think people are trying to unmute and you're trying to unmute.
Okay, I think we can hear you now. Let's try it.
No, I was just asking. I mean, I've been on this the Tea Party now, and I find it fantastic for the last 15 weeks, especially during lockdown. It's been absolutely brilliant. I was just going to ask a question to all the co-hosts and all the panelists. Like, you know, you talk about mentorship, you talk about different things regarding education, and I just like to ask who your mentors were, who your greatest influences were, what got you started in biotensegrity?
Great question. Who wants to start? Doug, do you want to take it first?
Sure. I think my story will be similar to many people's stories, but I honestly can't remember when I first started reading about it or where it was, but I certainly found Steve's website and was thinking about this a lot. And it explains, but the idea of biotensegrity explains lots of things that I couldn't understand any other ways. And really the magical things, which when we have the feeling of weightlessness come in and effortless power, those are the two I always come back to. So much where we in things we experience the opposite, lots of effort and not much results. And whether it's Tai Chi or whether it's making music, when we find that magical biphasic change and response, then things work. So I thought, well, I'm gonna write this guy, and he probably won't answer me. I've got some questions for him. And we were driving through DC, and he said, well, let's meet. And we ended up talking for about 3 hours in the hotel lobby, and it was an incredible experience and just incredibly validating. And there was right after that, there was the big that was in DC, which was people from all around, and Steve invited me to that, which I was so appreciative of. And one of the most remarkable things about that experience for me, as in a number of levels, but the name to this is such Steve. And by the way, I called him Dr. Levin about 10 times until he just told me to stop doing that. So not any lack of respect, but this goes to this point, was all of the name tags were devoid of titles, which is a really powerful statement. So normally if I'm talking to a doctor at Brigham and Women's, the doctor doesn't really give a hoot what I'm thinking. But Steve set up an environment where everybody's point of view is valid, and it's not hierarchical, I guess would be the thing to say. And he lives it, and so inspiring. Yes, thank you for that.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Steve, for setting such an amazing tone for this community. I remember the first one of these sessions that I attended. I can't remember. I was questioning and commenting, asking Graham questions, and it was only later that I realized that there were luminaries in this room, because I was just sort of naive and joining in, and realizing that we can all ask questions and are answered with the same weight and interest was a totally different experience than I've experienced in academic learning. So thank you for setting that tone. I don't know if Chris or Susan wants to take that mentorship question. Who were your mentors and how did you get drawn into biotensegrity? Looks like Chris maybe wants to take it.
Sure, I will. So first, my yoga teacher, Joy Irwin, was the person who introduced me to the concept of tensegrity and biotensegrity. And then, as I was sharing earlier, when I went to Washington, Susan really took me under her wing, for which I'm so grateful. But since then, Graham, you would be the person who I spend a lot of time with as well, who has really mentored me. I consider you guys also friends. And Steve is like a second father figure for me. We hosted the Pacific Northwest Big here in, outside of Vancouver in 2017, I think it was. And suddenly here was this person who I could ask questions to. I grew up more of a wallflower, and there is something about the way that you are, Steve, that makes it a safe place for even someone who is shy to let themselves be vulnerable. And so I'm really grateful for that. And for everybody else who I talk to. I mean, I've been lucky. John Sharkey's taught with on the online platform, Joanne, and each person who comes and just takes part in those discussions teaches me. So everybody, in this hierarchical space, everybody rises and steps back. And from each person who's willing to show up, to do the work and to share, there's always this connection. So, Mark, there's my answer for you.
Susan, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, yeah, I'll just say, Chris, I'll kind of second what Chris and Doug have said, that first of all, the community, the greater community, the tendency is that people are so enthusiastic about this emerging science that they are chomping at the bit to talk, to share, to, they're delighted. And at first you might think, oh, this person's really high up and why would they talk to me? But, they do, they're happy to. And I'm grateful, at the beginning, every chapter of my book, poor Handspring, they were waiting years for this book. And I said, it's not going to be worth anything to anyone if it's not right. And Daniel, Claude, and Graham and Steve read every chapter. And at some point, Daniel, Claude had a family situation and she couldn't continue that. But Graham and Steve, every chapter, they were willing to look at, and we'd go back and forth. We'd find something that we realized we needed to hash out between the three of us. I mean, it's just incredibly valuable experience. And so that's just, the community is generous. And Steve's critical thinking skills are excellent. And I thought I had developed pretty good critical thinking skills, but they got better because of the way he teaches. And I think that he's not often spoken of as a great teacher, but because he's got such excellent critical thinking skills, he shares that just in how he presents. And it's really wonderful, because if we don't get it, if you don't, when you have a question in here, nobody's ever asking you to just accept something without having the structural understanding behind it.
Thank you, Susan. I'm really loving this conversation. Melanie, I want to have you unmute and ask your question. You ask an important question, which is something about what you do when you have a naysayer in the group who maybe even starts to disrupt the flow of learning of others. And I want to hear that question in your own words. I think it's an important question. So if you want to unmute yourself, you can. Okay, let me do it for you. Okay, you're on.
Awesome, thank you very much. Yeah, I guess mine's a two-part question, but the gist of it is often in classes where I've presented this this concept, and I know from talking to other people who have done it as well, there are people who are really resistant to accept the concept of biotensegrity, and they will point to certain, I know that we're all probably familiar with these, certain videos that are posted online that are supposedly by experts that are really poo-pooing the concept and showing why in really ridiculous ways, but they seem really valid if you're not familiar. And for me, you know, I'm not a scientist. I have no science or math pedigree of any sort, so the fact that I explain something is not usually good enough to this person, even if I point them to the Biotensegrity Archive site and all of the papers and everything. I'm wondering, one, how do people respond to that in our panelists, if you've had that experience? And the other is if we can have some sort of, I don't know, rebuttal or some sort of response to some of the more common things that people would point to, if we can have sort of an official response to that, either in a video form or in a paper form or something. I don't know.
Who wants to take that question? I think it's a really important question for teaching any topic, really. So
I'll just say that the rebuttal thing, fine. It has to be done point by point, slowly, because often these people will make blanket statements. They'll say, that's ridiculous or whatever. And it's okay. Thank you for letting me know that's how you feel. Can you tell me more about that? Because if we don't have specific information from them, it gets to an emotional level, which is never where you want to have a conversation about biological structure, you know. It doesn't make any sense. So to get a very specific point, there's somebody who's been tussling with me, you know, on Twitter about the idea that the line, you really have only one muscle, which is all of them. And that concept, and they're saying, it's ridiculous. What do you mean we've got a million, this many, they've been counted, they've been sliced and diced, they've been named. How can you say there's one? You know, and so to get to the specifics of what's going on conceptually that leads to the statement, you know, and I just finally said, I think it has to, you know, it's an embryological thing, but I appreciate your questions. They help me think more clearly. So let us know, Melanie, what the specifics are, and we can knock them out of the park one by one.
Do any of the other panelists want to respond to that question? I know that Joanne Avison also has a comment related to that. I'll give it to the other panelists first, and then let's turn to Joan. So
yeah,
Joanne,
because well, Melanie's going to follow up, I think.
Oh, great.
I guess I just wanted to say that, you know, there's and Doug, you probably have the name. I can't remember his name. The particular video that I'm talking about. Do you?
Patrick, what's something or other? Johnson?
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, it's Johnson, no relation.
No relation. Just get that clear.
And Sergio Fonseca did a really great on Patrick Johnson. He's got something called Debunking Biotensegrity on YouTube, and you'll see it if you put in Debunking Biotensegrity. Sergio Fonseca did a really great job sort of making points and asking follow-up questions, which the last I checked hadn't been responded to yet by Dr. Johnson.
Great.
Melanie, did that answer your question or help?
Well, one thought in terms of the teaching and the context is, I mean, if you're working with, when we're likely working with musicians, if we're working with musicians and things are getting bogged down in that kind of discussion, it's not helping anybody. And I'm, at this point, I'm okay saying, well, just treat this as a metaphor for now. Explore that. So, and without taking on the religious arguments. And that might be offensive to some because we want this to define this as true. And ultimately that's my belief, but I think that can be a useful way in the context of a movement class. But if you're dealing with somebody that's medically trained and they're a spine doctor, it's difficult with our credentials, I think.
Thank you. I think that Joanne has a comment related to this topic as well. Let me help you unmute. I'm not sure how that works, but I'll unmute you. Okay, Joanne,
right?
try now. I can hear you. Yes.
Great.
Thank you for typing up.
Sorry,
well,
John,
you're
before
welcome.
you start, give me a second. All of you, you have the power to unmute yourself. Okay, so it's
just
allowed
didn't
to
work,
everyone.
Mariana,
Just keep
that's all.
yourself muted. It didn't
Okay.
work? Okay.
No,
well, it should
but anyway, I'm here now. I just wanted to say thank you, Melanie, for that question, because I think every single one of us in Biotensegrity has one of the motivating contexts for the last 10, 15 years has been that at whichever level of understanding or whichever discipline you're in, and if it's hierarchical, whichever spoke on the wheel of the mandala that you're on, what we're up against is a paradigm shift from a world in which the linear hard matter physics is dominant, and we're shifting into an explanation of a non-linear soft matter physics. And that is a quantum leap for anybody. And my heart goes out to you, and I am right with Susan with what she said, that when you're in a situation where someone says, for example, I'm a doctor of physics, who the hell are you, Joanne Aberson? Okay, you're a yoga therapist and a structural integrator, and what exactly qualifies you to say the words soft matter physics? And what I find is, just to endorse what Susan said, you can't pitch in with them and get all emotional and sort of stand there and just go, but you're wrong, just because it makes so much sense to you. And yet we are still invited into a very, very simple thing, which is where the mandala thing came from. And that's kindergarten. We're round. We're made of round things. And round things are nonlinear. And I'm like Susan on Twitter, I've had somebody on Facebook having a row with me or trying to provoke a row about the fact that you can't prove that there are no levers in nonlinear biologic forms. And I mean, I got to a point of desperation where I wrote to my beloved Stephen, dear Steve, how do I answer this? And he pretty much said, you're wasting your time. And I was like, yeah, but we still have to keep saying our little bit within the scope of practice we're in. And Steve also said something very helpful. He said, you can't prove a negative. And we're all out there to falsify our hypotheses. That's science. And so far, we haven't falsified biotensegrity as hard as I've been trying. And what's gradually happening is, in fact, a load of people stepped into this person that was arguing with me and sent papers to show things that helped in the mix. And I think if we just keep asking and keep saying, but it doesn't make sense, a lever is a single plane movement and we don't move in single planes, just on that simplest level, there must be more. And that's where I found myself, if it helps in any way, Melanie, just being safe with, not an argument, but hang on, I'm round and I'm a volume, and that's not how we explain volumes. Let's inquire differently. And as everyone else here has said, gently and softly and without waving flags too loud. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you, Joanne. That's great. I know Susan has something to say, but Stephen also, I think, wanted to say something. Stephen, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, I want to say thank you for all those kind words that everybody has been saying. And I've been at this for over 40 years. The first 30 years I spent talking to scientists and going to biomechanics conferences and becoming members of Biomechanics Society, and I got no place. I really got no place. a little over 10 years ago, I got closer to the kinesthetic learning community, which is a better way of saying what you all do. And you people have taken it to another level that's beyond the sciences. And it really belongs beyond the sciences, because the scientists are really hard to convince, and you people understand it better than the scientists ever will. Now, I've been brought up in the science community, and I'm one of those guys that stand in front of the audience with a bunch of slides and talk. And most scientists, that's the way they have to learn. But you people learn it completely differently. And I would love to get you people in a room with scientists and have them listen to you and do what you do, and be taught by you, so they can really understand what's going on. And I thank you again for all you. This has been the best session for me of all, because I've learned how to teach, which is something I've been trying to do for 40 years.
Thank you, Stephen. I know, Susan, you had comments, but I also, when we talked previously, you had some really interesting things to say about the balance between sort of practical learners or practical professionals and research professionals. And I think Chris had some interesting things on that too. So if we go there, fine. If we don't, that's also fine.
Well, all I wanted to say was in response to Joanne was saying that somebody said, you can't prove that there are no levers in the body. I would just say to those people, where is your proof that there are levers in the body? I've never seen that. I've seen embedded assumptions that have been around for 360 years, but I don't see any proof. And Joanne has a response, I think, to that. And I'm not sure I understood your question. Maybe you can re-ask.
That's okay. I think we can just keep going.
Yes,
and
I
should
ended up saying to that person, you prove to me that there are levers, and when you can send me a paper proving there are levers in nonlinear biologic forms, I will join you. But until that time, just, in other words, just stop beating me up on Facebook. But I'm absolutely with you.
I appreciate it so much, Leonid's. I can't remember which tea it was, but Leonid, when he was talking about the idea of the black box, which is 6, Susan says it's 6, which is an incredibly helpful clarification that we're taking structural engineering and overlaying it on the body, and we're making the assumption that's true and doing calculations accordingly. And I don't doubt there's been value from it, but the idea that we're saying that is what's happening in the body is not that's not what's happening with those calculations. And that clarification I found incredibly useful, and I think that would be next time I have a discussion with somebody that's like this, I'm going to bring up that point, because that clarifies the starting point.
Thank you, Doug. And thank you, Melanie, for asking a question that created so much rich discussion. I think that Lisa had a question. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure, thank you. I just want to throw this out before I ask my question, and you can try it and get back to me. But when people say there are levers in the body, I say, okay, stand against the wall with your heels against the wall and bend forward and see how that goes for you, because that would be a lever bending. I can't do it with my arms, but anyway, you get it. Try it, see how it works. It gets them thinking, at least. I don't know if it's right, but the question is, and I'm springing off of Melanie's question, because I've run into a little bit of a conundrum where I'm wanting to diversify my skill set. So I was asked to do some training for one of the associations here in my province. And that would require me to take training from a biomechanical model, and that just doesn't resonate with me, and I don't really want to do it. But it's a means to an end. And so for 2 years, this is something that I've been tossing around in my mind, going, okay, well, maybe I just do it, get it over with. Such a chore, though, for me. So then to diversify your skill set, it means I have to, in my mind, step back, go backwards instead of forwards. And yet, if I don't diversify and get into more areas, I'm not as heard. So actually my son said it at one point. He said, Mom, if you stop calling yourself a yoga teacher, then the athletes would listen to you more. And he has a point, right? We talked about speaking to your audience. So if I have a stamp of approval that I'm a personal trainer, with that, would you listen then? But if I get that stamp here in my area anyway, it's a biomechanical model, and it's like, I just, it hurts me thinking about it. So I don't know if you guys can speak to that. Expanding, diversifying.
You know, I'll just say, when you're getting your degree in something, in an academic setting, you're learning about the modes of inquiry, the critical thinking skills for that field. And you're learning what the sort of, you know, here's the constellation of things that if you understand this will give you whatever it is, the PhD, the master's degree, the certification. Once you have that good housekeeping seal of approval, you're good to go. You can say whatever you want. So sometimes we have to shut up and be a student and then say, thank you very much. And now with my new credential, I'm going to say this.
Chris, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Oh, I was just going to say that by the very nature of these Biotensegrity Party events and through the Trailblazers platform, we are diversifying our knowledge by talking to each other, because everybody here is bringing, we've got Traeger, I don't know the word, that practitioners, I guess, and Feldenkrais and scientists. And in the Trailblazers platform, we now have, Steve, you'll be happy to hear this, it started out primarily focused on movers, because that's what I do, but now we have some academics showing up. And I believe we are coming to this place where these conversations are going to be happening more and more, because I see them happening in my own circles, but also we have Montreal coming up, we have these events, and it just by the very nature of moving towards a paradigm shift, that diversity is happening. And I agree with what Susan said, but also keep coming, keep talking to other people, and naturally your knowledge will expand.
Great, thank you. Just from the folks who are co-hosting with me, what do we need to wrap up, or can we take one more comment? Mariana, Rachel, Lisa, anybody? I think they're saying keep going. Nobody said stop. Yeah. So Joanne, you raised your hand. Go ahead. I'll help you. If you take your finger off, I'll do it. Yep. It's not being very responsive. So there you go. Yep, you got it.
Yeah, I just wanted to also shout out to John Sharkey, who I've had the privilege of working quite closely with over recent years, because of the sheer, I mean, he's known Steve forever. And I know you're here, John, so I'm sort of speaking for you, but what I've been able to witness, I'm not speaking for you, that's not true. I've witnessed as a practitioner being able to be in the anatomical laboratory, where I know, even studying fascia, just referring back to a previous Biotensegrity Party, you know, what's all the fuss about fascia? There is a connective tissue that does help us change the rules about the standard biomechanical models and the biomechanical models and the linear models, and the fascia research. And interestingly, you know, I know Jaap van der Wal very well, and he will say the same. In 1985, his first tissue sparing dissection of the human body was poo-pooed. He wasn't the first to do it. Mamarin were his teachers, but it was poo-pooed and reduced and not published. And it wasn't published until the 2009 International Fascia Research Congress, in which he was encouraged by Peter Hojing to present to people like us, to practitioners outside the scientific field, the traditional scientific field. And what he, I think, underestimated was the groundswell response of people like us asking these questions, raising this point, it makes sense. It makes sense of my movement class. It makes sense of my experience with my hands on the body. It makes sense of all these things. Now, John Sharkey has pioneered this field, and it really, we have to remember that it's partly due to him being willing to stand there in the laboratory in medical school in Dundee over recent decades and just say to everybody, fascia matters, fascia matters, fascia matters. That we last year.
It looks like John wants to speak too. So
yeah,
when you
I hope he does. And last summer, this was actually internationally recognized at the highest level of anatomical recognition. Now, I'm not saying biotensegrity is being recognized. And, you know, I've been in the lab with professors in Dundee, sort of, seriously, what are you talking about? And understanding force transmission and blah, 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 with a long way to go. But this is progress with a capital P. And the reason I'm saying this is that every single one of you, every inquiry, and we can't put those inquiries as some are better and some are worse. I'm not doing that. I know John would be the last to stand and shout his corner. What I'm saying is, from all angles, this is being addressed, and diligently, we just keep saying it. We just keep scratching away. And you know, over to you, John, to speak about what you've done. But I just
go ahead, John. Thank you, Joanne.
This isn't local. This really isn't local.
First of all, I'm really enjoying the session. It's fantastic. Whenever I can on a Friday evening, unfortunately, Friday evenings sometimes are quite busy, so I've missed one or two, but I do my best to try to be here. But it's a great question. It was Lisa, wasn't it? Lisa who I think brought this question up, and it gets to the heart of everything that we're trying to achieve, I believe. First of all, let's embrace people who do not agree with the tensegrity or biotensegrity model. Let's embrace them. The fact of the matter is that we need these individuals, we need these people, because if we cannot put up a cogent argument, then, you know, something is wrong, something is missing. I love to encourage people to disagree with every single thing that I say. Dr. Professor Jaap van der Waal, got very emotional when he came to Dundee. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said that he felt that he had lied to his students for 30 years because he had been teaching them classical anatomy. And a little bit like what you're saying, Lisa, you know, the idea of doing this biomechanics course was an anathema to you. I would encourage you to go and do it, enjoy every moment of it. Learn what you can from it, because if you do not know what the other model is, if you do not know what it is that they're saying in depth, you know, to the level of perhaps, you know, degree status, well, then you're never really going to be in a position to be able to have a full discussion, because you're only going to have one side, which is the biotensegrity, the new model. And we really need to, historically, we need to know where we've come from in order to be able to appreciate and realize where we are, and then to have the vision to know where we're going in the future. So I wouldn't be worried about it at all and think, oh my God, do I have to do this? I'd be saying, brilliant. This is a unique opportunity given to me, and it will allow me to be able to speak informatively, you know, from a position of knowledge. So I think I would encourage you to go and do the course. I really would.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate that encouragement as well. And it is really interesting to think that as the people on the leading edge, we have to be fluent in 2 languages instead of just 1. And I think that that is a really good point of yours. My sister is a veterinarian, and she always jokes that she has to know, you know, lots of different species compared to a medical doctor who only knows 1. So we can think of ourselves as the veterinarians of biological models. So I know that Elizabeth Larkham wants to join us with a question or comment. I will unmute you, and then you can go ahead. It seems to take several taps to unmute, so I'm working on it. Whoops. I will tell you when you're unmuted. I'm not sure what's going on with Zoom today. Okay, you should be unmuted now.
You see, just in keeping with emergent properties of biotensegrity, it takes a village. Like you tap, I tap, and then I can speak. Yes, yes, which is essentially really my observation, that the phrase emergent properties I think is must operate on all levels, all scales, and in all systems, with our individual kinesthetic blind spots, as well as the sort of the blind spots or the blockades in shifts of consciousness. So when I started at the beginning of this Biotensegrity Party, I was quite bothered by the fact that the social media within the Pilates community that I frequent is all excited about a recent post, which is completely bullshit. And I had a sense of being in antagonistic behavior to that. And I'm so grateful to the kind and constructive and patient presentations by each panelist, such that as a result of this, I've now softened and can be in a more Tai Chi response, like Susan mentions, in order just to let that be and recognize that it's my responsibility in my community to be as clear as possible and to embody that, and that to turn to the resources that this Biotensegrity Party offers, with the brilliant and the patient teaching of Steve and of Graham and of John and Joanne, and the people who are really committed to the shifting paradigms with integrity rather than not.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think that we're ready to wrap up. I really want to thank all of you for your deep engagement in this conversation. It has been so satisfying to be in the room with all of you, discussing how to talk about this thing, biotensegrity, that we're all so fascinated with, but that is sometimes stuns us with its complexity and other times with its simplicity. So thank you for helping us look at that. Before we close out, I just wanted to give, Chris, you had mentioned something about Montreal, and because I think that's going to be a great learning opportunity, I just want you to say what you meant when you said Montreal. Maybe give us the name of the event and roughly when and where it's happening.
It's happening in 2021, just ahead of the International Fascia Research Congress. And we are in the planning stages. Susan, you might want to say more about it. Do we have a name yet? I'm not sure that we do.
Well, we'll be releasing all that soon. I think we've been, with COVID, we were kind of knocked off our typical courses of for many things. And we're kind of getting ourselves reconfigured together. But we do have committees to both evaluate proposals for the more scientific presentations in a kind of conventional scientific conference format, as well as the sort of more arts and applications. We're literally looking to the tensegrity model for the pushes and pulls and the balance between, and the happy concatenation that can result.
Thank you. Thank you all. And I realize in planning for this, I don't know if there's a traditional closing ceremony.
Well, we want to hear from our sponsors one more time.
Perfect. Maybe somebody can do that.
And then maybe a closing toast, Patricia.
Okay, thank you.
Rachel, do you want to do the sponsors?
No, thanks. So the Biotensegrity Tea Party events are a production of the Stephen M. Lemmet M11 Biotensegrity Archive in Washington, D.C., whose mission includes education and building community. Subscribe to our email list and register to join us next week on Zoom. Please download our BX 101 self-study guide to beginning biotensegrity at biotensegrityarchive.org, which Susan also mentioned this, think at the beginning, and my question about reliable information as well. Once again, we want to give a huge thanks to our sponsors, our publisher Handspring Publishing in East Lothian, Scotland, who have offered everyone on the archive email list a generous coupon for purchasing their books. So thank you, Handspring. Thanks also to Fernando Tajaro and Artifact Pro in Madrid for sponsoring us today and supplying our archive newsletter readers with a coupon code to get a very nice discount for their wonderful models. We also want to thank Embodied Biotensegrity and to Chris for our technical support. Thank you to the ever flexible and supportive Mariana Barreto, also the ever flexible and supportive Lisa Babiuk, and to the Brita Fascist Symposium in the UK, which not only organizes their biannual BFS event, but several other exciting programs. And now I'm going to turn it back to you because I'm clearly having trouble speaking.
Thank you, Rachel. And Mariana just helpfully posted the links that I put on my slide for additional resources for learning about biotensegrity. So if you want to capture those from the chat, you're welcome to do so. So to close out today, I would just say another cheers to being lifelong learners, specifically in the field of biotensegrity, and to being as flexible and changing and both complex and simple as the model itself. Cheers.
Yes.
Everyone.
Thank you.